Mommy?
Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and as requested, today we'll be exploring Richard Stanley's 2019 Lovecraftian horror film, Color Out of Space. Lurking fear, cosmic horror, eldritch abominations, the unfathomable dread of the unknown. These are all key elements in the works of the massively influential author, H.P. Lovecraft, whose stories have inspired various films, video games, and television shows. One of his most famous works is The Color Out of Space, which tells the story of a mysterious meteorite that crashes near a farm and begins to poison the bodies and minds of every living thing nearby, mutating plants into unnatural shapes and colors, transmogrifying animals, and driving humans living in the area to insanity. Richard Stanley's kaleidoscope film, Color Out of Space, adapts Lovecraft's story for a modern audience, moving the story from the 1880s to 2019. This actually isn't the first time The Color Out of Space has been brought to film though. 1965's Die Monster Die and 1987's The Curse were both based on the short story, and 2018's Annihilation shares many plot similarities with it as well. Lovecraft's story focused on Nahum Gardner, his wife, and his 3 sons. This time around, the characters have been updated, and the story takes place in the present. Now we watch Nicolas Cage's Nathan Gardner, his wife Teresa, their oldest stoner son Benny, younger son Jack, and goth Wiccan daughter Lavinia as they're slowly overtaken by cosmic horror. Oh, and Tommy Chong is thrown in there too as a squatter hippie named Ezra, who falls under the influence of the color. The original 1927 story is told from an outsider's perspective. The protagonist is an unnamed Boston surveyor who discovers an eerily grey and barren area outside of Arkham, the fictional town where most of the Cthulhu mythos is set. The narrator discovers that the area is shunned by locals and referred to as the Blasted Heath. He struggles to get information about this cursed area, and the only person who'll talk to him about it is the crazy old man, Army Pierce. In Stanley's film, Army's character is scrapped, but the surveyor character remains. This time is a hydrologist named Ward Phillips who stumbles upon the Gardner family while studying the area for a new dam development. Ward's character alone gives us plenty of neat Easter eggs. For starters, his name is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft's real name, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. At one point in the movie, he's shown reading the novella The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, which Lovecraft considered to be the best supernatural story in all of English literature. Ward is also shown repping a Miskatonic University shirt, another fictional place that exists within Lovecraft country. This isn't the only nod to other Lovecraft locales either. At one point, a weather report mentions Dunwich, Innsmouth, and Kingsport, while Aylesbury also gets name-dropped as well. In true Lovecraft fashion, the origins of the mystical colour aren't clear. Of course, that doesn't mean there aren't theories. In fact, Stanley has his own theory about the meteorite and the life-sucking entity it brought to Earth. He told Slash Film, "The thing with meteorites, there's a strong possibility that all life on this planet could have been started by them, and by the same token, all life on this planet can be vaporized and wiped out by meteors eventually. They aren't good or evil, they don't really care that they've actually created us, and probably did so by accident. By that logic, it's possible that the color might have created the Earth and might lead to its end. It's not a malicious force necessarily, it's simply fulfilling part of an evolutionary cycle." In the short story, the color is described as having an otherworldly glow that shows colors that have never been seen by the human eye before. Of course, movie magic isn't powerful enough to invent brand new colors, so instead, the rock is magenta. Magenta is an extra spectral color, which means it doesn't appear in the rainbow, and can only be perceived by blending the blue and red optical rods in the eye. Magenta is a mix of red and blue and doesn't actually exist on its own, implying that the color is actually some sort of unnatural, real instance of magenta. Stanley also explained that magenta was chosen in order to achieve maximum distortion and uneasiness. The color distortion when something enters your consciousness, human consciousness, has its limits, and those limits in the visual spectrum, ultraviolet and infrared, and I guess magenta, is what happens when you mix the two, a kind of neural bridge between them. As the movie progresses and the color's influence grows, more and more of the plant life turn unnatural magentas and purples. Even bugs become pink. Since the color seems to reside primarily in the well, as evidenced by the fact that Jack keeps whistling to it and becomes oddly fixated on it, the water is largely affected too. Even after the meteorite first lands, Ward notes that Ezra's water has taken on a bizarre oily sheen, and when Nathan pours himself a drink, you can see the ice gets progressively pinker as the color poisons it further. animals living on the farm are mutated by the color too. Lavinia's horse, Comet, develops a purple sheen in his eye before getting spooked and running away from the farm, while the Gardner family dog Sam snarls and reacts violently to forces unseen. Comet and Sam's behaviors seem to indicate that animals are more attuned to certain aspects of the color. Similar to how dogs can hear high-pitched sounds that humans can't, the animals can likely pick up on the color's presence more easily. In addition to Sam and Comet's odd behaviors, Ezra's cat, G-Spot, becomes unrecognizable due to the color's influence. The cat loses all its hair and gains a ton of nasty ulcers and skin lesions instead. Towards the end of the movie, a huge pile of melded, blistering animals are found and brought to Arkham City Hall, and Ward points out that many of the color's effects on the animals are similar to that of radiation burns. The farm's alpacas are oddly ravenous and continuously escape and eat crops, and later become assimilated into one disgusting, gurgling, hairless flesh mass. The same blast of light that merges all the alpacas together also combines Jack and Teresa into a pitiful abomination that begins to blister and grey over time. The color also affects Nathan's crops. There's a scene where his tomatoes have grown months early and to an enormous size. Unfortunately though, the tomatoes taste really foul, leading Nathan to shout and slam dunk them into the trash.
Hey, coming up! You know what?
Okay, stop it! Stop it!
Slam dunk!
The fact that they've grown up so quickly brings us to one of the color's other interesting powers, time manipulation. Time begins passing differently at the farm after the meteorite lands. Even when it first arrives, time seems to freeze. Jack becomes frozen in panic. Benny drools uncontrollably for quite some time and doesn't even seem to notice, and the entire household's activities seem to slow to a crawl. Later, when Lavinia attempts to clean blood off the knife that her mother had chopped her fingers off with, the color strikes and she blacks out, accidentally overflowing the sink with bloody water. We see her standing there for only a few moments, but in the color's time loop, it seems that hours have passed. As if manipulating plants, animals, and time itself wasn't enough, the color also interferes with electronics. It bleeds its magenta hues into television screens, giving the movie a neat poltergeist aesthetic. It also messes with phone lines and the internet connection, making it impossible to contact anyone outside of the farm. The inclusion of techno hauntings here is really interesting. Obviously, with the 1880 setting, Lovecraft couldn't really incorporate jeeps or radios into a story, which is why I love that Stanley's retelling cleverly adds a new layer to the lore of the color. Of course, the color also takes its toll on the gardener's sanity, affecting Nathan the most. As Nathan becomes more aggressive and unhinged, he starts impersonating his abusive father.
Exactly the same smell as the cancer ward where my father was. You know, death, disinfectant, the cancer smell, rotting milk. You know the smell. You know the cancer smell better than anybody.
When acting like his dad, Cage puts on this incredible accent, similar to the one he puts on in 1988's Vampire's Kiss. Stanley loved Cage's performance in that film and actually asked him to perform Nathan in a similar fashion. Vampire's Kiss is one of Cage's most over-the-top roles, so it makes sense that he would tap into this energy since Nathan is completely out of his mind. With that, Cage is a perfect casting choice for Nathan. It's a delight to watch him scream and thrash about in his car, or smile twistedly after shooting his own wife and son before proclaiming,
They're not my family.
The last 20 minutes of this movie turns everything up to 11 and weaves together all of the clues and Easter eggs for one awesome climax. Before I break down the ending though, I have to explain Lavinia, the biggest Lovecraft Easter egg of all. Lavinia is actually named after Lavinia Whatley, a character in Lovecraft's story The Dunwich Horror, which details how her family used a Necronomicon to cast spells and summon unearthly beings to the town of Dunwich. Before the color arrives, you can see that she has a copy of the Necronomicon splayed across her bed. When things really begin escalating, Lavinia gets desperate and casts a spell directly from the book, reading incantations from it and carving runes into her flesh with a box cutter. The rune that she carves into her forehead is the Norse rune Othala, which can be interpreted to mean heritage or family. Ultimately, the spell barely helps her. She still really can't escape the farm, well at least not in the way that she intended. And though the Teresa Jack monster doesn't end up seriously hurting her, it still doesn't exactly make anything any less mentally scarring for her. On this particular topic, Stanley explained, there is no direct evidence that it helps her survival chances, or contributes to her understanding of the implacable, ultra-dimensional threat that opposes them. In the end, not even the help of another supernatural force can save them from their impending doom. The color cannot be stopped. By the end, the color seems to have accelerated time a great deal. When Ward and the sheriff arrive, Nathan has gone completely mad, and the rash that had been developing on his arm has progressed rapidly. Despite there being no one around him, he insists that his family are all with him in the living room, well, except for Benny.
Benny lives in the world now.
In the attic, the Teresa Jack abomination has also decayed quickly before fully losing its humanity. Even Ezra's corpse is decomposed far faster than what would normally be possible. When Ward and the sheriff enter his home, a distorted tape is playing Ezra's journal entries detailing the color's impact on the farm, and it seems like they cover far more time than the few days that had passed since the meteor landed. Just an interesting side note, the dialogue playing on the tapes here is actually Nahum's final words in the original Lovecraft story. By this point in the film, even the color's influence on the plants has multiplied by about 1 million, with a sentient, gnarled tree impaling the sheriff after he and Ward leave Ezra's place. By the time Ward shambles back to the farm, Lavinia has been completely overtaken by the color. She glows and shows Ward a frightening vision of overgrown tendrils in a magenta landscape. Then she turns into dust and is swept up by the pillar of light. Ward runs back to the house and sees Nathan, who should be dead at this point. The color has Nathan repeating Lavinia's lines from earlier, regurgitating past events. Audio of various conversations meld together as Ward escapes to the basement, implying that multiple dimensions and time itself are melding together. Most likely, the color's time loop has warped Nathan and Lavinia further, hence why Nathan is so whacked when Ward and the sheriff arrived, or why Lavinia suddenly convinced herself that she needs to stay at the house. The hallucinations have made them fully believe that they are still okay and together, while Ward, who has comparatively only been under the color's influence a short time, can still distinguish between real and fake. It could also be possible that the color simply compelled Lavinia to stay, or that it was powerful enough to reanimate Nathan's corpse. It's not 100% clear, but therein lies the joy of Lovecraft, being faced with the unknown and unexplainable. Finally, the color pulsates and one last blast of light is emitted. When Ward emerges from the basement, all is grey dust, just like the blasted heath described in the original short story. Either the color fully sucked the life out of everything, or time accelerated so quickly that everything turned to dust. Likely, it was a combination of both that caused this ruinous landscape. The film then ends with Ward overlooking the new reservoir that covers the old farmland. He comments that he hopes the hideous truth will be covered forever, but that he will never drink the water. And then a pink bug flies across the screen, implying that the horror is far from over. Richard Stanley intends for this to be a start of a trilogy of Lovecraft adaptations, and this open-ended finale perfectly sets the stage. In fact, the next planned movie adaptation is The Dunwich Horror, so it's possible that Lavinia may somehow return. All in all, Color Out of Space is an intensely horrific movie. Nicolas Cage brings the classic Cage rage, and there's a B-movie cheesiness to the film that makes it very enjoyable. It has plenty of nods to other Lovecraft works, but it's still accessible to weird science newcomers. The atmosphere of the first half is perfectly tense and eerie, and while the second half doesn't quite match the dread of the beginning, it's still a thoroughly engaging movie. Gruesome moments like Nathan kissing his wife's deformed lips as a trail of purple goo passes between them would have made Lovecraft proud. If the upcoming entries into this planned Lovecraft trilogy are anywhere near as over-the-top hideous as this movie, we are surely in for a twisted treat. With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.